Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to get a little dark today?
Always.
Well, today we are going deep on some iconic horror movie death scenes.
Sounds fun.
I thought you might like this one. We're going to dig into all the crazy stories, the cool tricks, and the real-life drama behind 10 of the most unforgettable horror movie deaths.
10. Ambitious.
It is. I found this article called 10 Behind-the-Scenes Facts about iconic deaths in horror movies on Listverse.
Listverse is always a good time.
Right. So we're talking Friday the 13th, The Exorcist, Psycho, Alien,
But plots that stick with you long after the credits roll.
Exactly. I think you'll be surprised by some of the things we uncover today. I bet you'll never watch these films the same way again.
I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Let's start at Camp Crystal Lake, shall we? That sleeping bag kill from Friday the 13th, Part 7. The new blood is still so brutal. You know the one I mean. Jason yanks the poor girl right out of her tent, sleeping bag and all.
Yeah. I can still picture it.
And apparently, it was even gorier in the original cut. They had to tone it down to get an R rating.
Seriously, what did they cut?
Well, apparently the original version showed the girl's body actually being folded in half inside the sleeping bag.
Ouch. Yeah, I can see why they cut that.
Right. Even the MPAA has its limits. But get this. Kane Hodder, the guy who played Jason, actually says that's one of his favorite kills.
Really? Why? I always assumed actors would be drawn to the more elaborate kills with the cool weapons and all.
It's not about the gore, apparently. Hodder said he liked it because Jason used something ordinary, a sleeping bag, instead of his usual machete. It was different.
That's so interesting. It makes you see everyday objects in a whole new light, doesn't it? Suddenly, everything seems a little more sinister.
Right. My sleeping bag is never going to feel quite the same. Okay, let's move on to a film that's a bit more psychological now. Hereditary. That decapitation scene. Just disturbing.
Yeah, that one stays with you. It's so unexpected and brutal.
And so well done, too. The special effects are incredible.
But here's a little behind-the-scenes tidbit that might surprise you. Millie Shapiro, the actress who played Charlie, actually loved filming that scene.
No way. Really?
Yeah, she compared it to a roller coaster ride.
Wow, that's dedication. I guess even in the midst of all that horror, there's still an element of fun and excitement on set.
Absolutely, and the story gets even better. Apparently, Millie Shapiro wanted to keep the prop head.
Oh my God, no. That's a little too creepy for me, even as a souvenir.
Right, some things are better left on set. But okay, let's lighten things up a bit. Well, as light as we can get with slasher films, that is. How about Black Christmas?
Ooh, good one. That plastic bag scene. So simple, yet so effective.
Absolutely. It plays on our primal fears of suffocation and helplessness. Just terrifying.
And imagine being the actress who had to film that.
Right. Talk about a tough day on set.
So, Lynn Griffin, who played the victim, Jess, was apparently a really strong swimmer. And she could hold her breath for a long time, which definitely came in handy.
I bet. But how did they keep the plastic bag from fogging up during the filming?
That's a good question. Apparently, they poked tiny holes in it so she could breathe.
Smart. It's amazing how they figured out those practical solutions back then.
Right. And it just goes to show that sometimes the simplest effects are the most impactful.
Speaking of impactful, let's talk about The Exorcist.
Oh, yeah. The Exorcist, that window jump still gets me every time.
Yes.
So much terror packed into a few seconds.
Pure cinematic brilliance. And they had to go to great lengths to get that shot.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. They actually had to extend the set because the real house wasn't close enough to the steps for the stunt to work.
Exactly. And they covered those steps in rubber to make sure the stuntman, Chuck Waters, landed safely. Can you imagine the impact of that jump?
Ouch. And apparently people were so captivated by the stunt that they paid to watch it from nearby buildings. I mean, who needs Netflix when you have a live exorcism stunt happening across the street?
Haha, exactly. Talk about dedication to your craft.
Now, let's talk about a film that's terrifying, but also carries a powerful message. Night of the Living Dead. That ending, where the main character, Ben, gets mistakenly shot.
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
so much more than a typical horror movie death.
It really is. Casting Dwayne Jones, a black actor, as the lead added this whole other layer to the film.
Especially given the social climate of the time.
Right. Ben surviving the night only to be shot by a white posse. It was a pretty stark commentary on racial injustice.
Yeah. And Romero, the director, actually had a fight to keep that ending. The studio wanted something more upbeat.
Wow, really? I'm glad he stuck to his guns. It's a powerful ending, and it really elevates the film beyond just a typical zombie flick.
For sure. It's a reminder that horror can be more than just jump scares. It can make you think, make you confront uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. Okay, are you ready to answer the phone? We're stepping into the world of Scream next.
Oh man, Scream. That opening scene with Drew Barrymore, masterful. It's such a slow burn, but the tension builds so perfectly.
It's one of the most iconic openings in horror movie history, and it was inspired by a real event.
Wait, really? Tell me more.
The screenwriter, Kevin Williamson, was house-sitting and got spooked by an open window. So he called a friend while holding a butcher knife for protection,
Uh-huh. I've been there.
and his friend, jokingly, started making the Friday the 13th music sound.
And that sparked the idea for the entire movie. That's amazing.
Yep. Talk about inspiration striking in unexpected places.
And Drew Barrymore was originally offered the lead role, Sidney Prescott.
But she chose to play Casey instead.
Exactly. She wanted to subvert audience expectations by having the seemingly main character killed off early on.
That's such a bold move, and it totally works. You're on the edge of your seat wondering who else might not make it out alive.
Okay, let's shift gears to Final Destination 2. Remember that insane highway pileup scene? Pure chaos.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy how much work went into that sequence. They spent 11 days filming it.
Wow, 11 days. That's a lot of time for one scene.
And they used a combination of real stunts and CGI to create that over-the-top carnage. But here's the kicker.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Those logs that go flying everywhere, they're CGI.
Really? Why not just use real logs?
Because real logs apparently don't bounce high enough.
You've got to be kidding me. So even in a scene that's all about practical effects, they had to cheat a little bit. I guess realism has its limits, even in war movies.
Right. But sometimes you gotta bend the rules a bit to get those truly spectacular shots.
Now, let's go back to basics for a moment. Jaws. That first attack scene. Spielberg really knew how to create suspense, didn't he?
Absolutely. It's a masterclass in tension building. And to think they did it all with practical effects.
Those underwater shots, the glimpses of the shark's fin, is still so effective, even decades later.
They actually simulated the attack with ropes and a team of men pulling the actress Susan Backlini underwater.
I bet that was a wild experience for her.
And for that final dramatic pull, Spielberg himself grabbed the rope.
Wow. Talk about a hands-on director. And speaking of hands-on, there's a story about Spielberg pouring water down Backlini's throat to get a more realistic drowning sound.
Yeah, I've heard about that one. A little controversial maybe, but definitely effective.
It makes you wonder, where do you draw the line between realism and, well, maybe going a bit too far?
That's a question that comes up a lot in horror, doesn't it?
Okay, get ready to step into the shower now. The
Mhm.
psycho shower scene. It's iconic for a reason.
Absolutely. It changed horror forever.
And Hitchcock was obsessed with that scene. I mean, he dedicated a whole week to filming it.
Whole week for a scene that's just a couple of minutes long? That's incredible.
Right, and he was super meticulous about every detail. He used multiple cameras, different angles, even had Janet Leigh, who played Marion Crane, redo the scene over and over to get it just right.
I read somewhere that she was having trouble breathing properly during the scene because of all the fake blood they were using.
Oh yeah, they had to find creative solutions for everything back then. And they used all sorts of weird stuff for the sound effects and the fake blood.
Like what?
Well, they used a melon for the sound of the knife, a steak for the sound of the flesh, and chocolate syrup for the blood.
Chocolate syrup? That's genius. Who would have thought?
Right. Hitchcock was a master of making do with what he had.
Speaking of making do, how about we blast off into space now? Alien. That chestburster scene. Just, wow, visceral doesn't even begin to describe it.
Yeah, that's one of those scenes that you just can't unsee. It's so shocking and so well done.
Ridley Scott, the director, really knew how to build tension, and he had a brilliant strategy for getting those genuine reactions of horror from the actors.
What was it?
He kept them in the
Right.
dark about what the chestburster would look like. They had no idea what was coming.
Oh, wow. So they were basically reacting in real time to this
Yeah.
thing, bursting out of John Hurt's chest.
Yep. John Hurt was under the table with a prosthetic chest filled with meat and the creature ready to pop out.
Ugh, just the thought of it.
Yeah. It worked, though. Veronica Cartwright, who played Lambert, actually fainted when the blood splattered on her.
No way. They kept that in the movie, right?
Oh, yeah. And Yaphet Kotto, who played Parker, was so disturbed by the experience that he isolated himself from the other actors afterward.
That's intense. It makes you really appreciate what those actors go through to bring those terrifying moments to life.
It's easy to forget that they're real people having real reactions to these,
Yeah.
well, these pretty messed up situations.
For sure.
It's amazing how these filmmakers can create something so horrifying, but also so captivating. You can't look away.
It's like a morbid curiosity, right? We're
Mhm.
drawn to the darkness, even though it scares us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, want to revisit one we talked about earlier. I think Psycho deserves a little more attention, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. The shower scene is like the gold standard of horror. It's been studied and imitated for decades.
Hitchcock knew exactly what he was doing with that scene. It's all about suggestion, about what you don't see.
It's like he's playing mind games with the audience. He's making you fill in the blanks with your own fears.
Right. And the editing, those quick cuts, the close-ups on the shower head and the drain. It's like he's slowly ratcheting up the tension until you can barely breathe.
And the sound design. Don't forget about the sound design. Those screeching violins. Pure nightmare fuel. But did you know that they used a melon to create the sound of the knife?
Wait, really? A melon?
Yep. And a stake for the sound of the flesh hitting the floor.
That's incredible. It's amazing how resourceful those early filmmakers were. I mean, they didn't have all the fancy technology we have today.
It's like they were doing Foley work before Foley was even a thing. Okay, let's talk about another master of suspense. Jaws. That first attack scene, pure genius.
It's a masterclass in suspense. Spielberg keeps a shark hidden for most of the scene, letting our imaginations run wild.
It's funny, right? We know it's just a mechanical shark, but our brains are still hardwired to be afraid of those kinds of predators.
It's primal fear, pure and simple. And Spielberg knows exactly how to tap into it.
And remember how Spielberg actually got in on the action, pulling the rope himself for that final dramatic pull?
Yeah, talk about dedication. And speaking of dedication, remember that story we discussed about Spielberg pouring water down Susan Backlany's throat to get a more realistic drowning sound?
Oh, yeah. It's a little controversial, but you got to admire his commitment to authenticity.
It's like, how far is too far for art? It's an interesting question.
Right. Okay, let's blast off into space now.
Yeah.
Alien. That chest burster scene. I mean, what can you even say about that scene? It's just,
Wow. It's one of those scenes that's burned into your memory forever. You can't unsee it.
it's so visceral,
Mhm.
so disturbing, but also kind of fascinating in a weird way, you know?
I know exactly what you mean. And what's so brilliant about it is that Ridley Scott, the director, kept the actors completely in the dark about what was going to happen.
They had no idea what that chest burster was going to look like.
No, but they were reacting in real time to this thing bursting out of John Hurt's chest. It was all genuine horror and disgust.
Wow. No wonder Veronica Cartwright fainted.
Exactly. And Yaphet Kotto was so disturbed by the experience that he isolated himself from the other actors afterward.
It's like some things you just can't unsee, even if you're an actor who's seen it all.
Right. Okay, let's come back down to earth now. How about Hereditary? That decapitation scene. It's just haunting.
It's so sudden, so shocking. And the way it's filmed, with those close-ups and slow-motion shots,
Yeah.
it's masterful filmmaking.
It's a perfect example of how effective practical effects can be. They built a whole rig for that scene with a fake head and everything.
And remember, Millie Shapiro, who played Charlie, actually enjoyed filming it.
She said it was like being on a roller coaster.
It's wild how something that's so disturbing to watch can be so much fun to create. I guess that's the magic of movies.
It's all about illusion, isn't it? Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit. Scream. That opening scene with Drew Barrymore. Pure slasher movie gold.
It's such a brilliant setup. The phone calls, the taunting. It's like Wes Craven is playing a game of cat and mouse with the audience.
And Drew Barrymore is fantastic in that scene. She's so believable, so vulnerable.
It's hard to believe she wasn't originally supposed to play that role. She was offered the lead, but she chose to play Casey instead, to subvert expectations.
That's a pretty bold move, and it totally pays off. Her death scene is one of the most iconic in horror history.
Okay, buckle up. We're about to experience some major carnage. Final Destination 2. That highway pileup scene is just pure cinematic chaos.
It's insane, and the stunt team deserves major props for pulling it off. They spent 11 days filming that sequence.
Wow. 11 days for one scene. They must have been exhausted.
And they used a combination of practical effects and CGI to create that over-the-top disaster. But you know what's funny?
What?
Those logs that go flying everywhere, they had to add those in with CGI.
Really? Why? Were real logs too dangerous or something?
Yep. Apparently real logs don't bounce high enough.
You've got to be kidding me. So even in a scene that's all about practical effects,
Yeah.
they had to fudge it a little bit.
Right. Sometimes reality just isn't dramatic enough for Hollywood.
Right. Okay, let's take a break from the carnage and talk about a film that's a little more subtle. The Exorcist. That window jump. It's still so chilling.
It's a classic horror movie moment. And to think They had to extend the set to make it work.
The real house wasn't close enough to the steps for the stunt to work.
Nope. And they covered those steps in rubber to protect the stuntman, but it's still a crazy stunt.
I bet. And remember, people actually paid to watch the stunt from nearby buildings.
Talk about a captive audience.
Okay, let's talk about a film that's not just scary, but also incredibly thought-provoking. Night of the Living Dead. That ending where the main character, Ben, gets mistakenly shot. It's just heartbreaking.
It's such a powerful scene, and it really elevates the film beyond just a typical zombie movie. It's a commentary on race, on society, on humanity.
And it's all the more impactful because Romero, the director, had to fight to keep that ending. Studio wanted something more upbeat.
I'm glad he stuck to his guns. That ending is what makes the film so memorable and so relevant even today.
It's a reminder that horror can be more than just entertainment. It can be a way to explore complex issues and challenge our perceptions.
Exactly. Okay, let's delve into the world of slashers again. Black Christmas. That plastic bag suffocation scene. So simple, yet so effective.
It's just creepy. And the fact that we never see the killer's face makes it even scarier.
Right. It's like our imaginations are creating the monster for us.
And the filmmaker's decision to shoot the scene from the victim's POV just adds to that feeling of claustrophobia and dread.
We're trapped right there with her, experiencing the terror firsthand.
It's a scene that definitely stays with you.
Okay, how about we revisit Camp Crystal Lake? Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, that sleeping bag kill. It's one of the most brutal in the entire franchise.
Oh, man. That scene is rough. And to think they had to tone down the violence to get an R rating. Can you imagine what the original cut looked like?
Right. It makes you wonder what their censors were thinking.
But here's what's funny. Kane Hodder, the guy who played Jason, says that's one of his favorite kills.
Really? I guess I always assumed actors would be drawn to the more elaborate kills with the cool weapons and all.
Nope. Hodder liked it because Jason used something ordinary, a sleeping bag, instead of his usual machete. He liked that it was different.
It's like he's saying, I don't need fancy weapons to be a killing machine.
Exactly. And it taps into that fear of the familiar becoming dangerous. Suddenly, something as innocent as a sleeping bag becomes a weapon of death.
It's a reminder that horror can lurk anywhere, even in the most mundane objects.
Okay, let's take a break from the slashers and talk about a film that's more about psychological terror. The Silence of the Lambs. That scene where Clarice first meets Hannibal Lecter. It's just electric.
It's a masterclass in suspense building. The way the camera slowly zooms in on Lecter's face as he sizes up Clarice, it's like you can feel the tension rising.
Anthony Hopkins is just incredible in that scene. He's so charismatic and so menacing at the same time.
He embodies pure evil, but there's also a strange vulnerability to him. It's like he's both repellent and attractive at the same time.
It's a complex performance, and it's one of the reasons why that scene is so memorable. And Jodie Foster is equally brilliant as Clarice. She's so strong, so intelligent, but you can also sense her fear.
It's a battle of wills between two incredibly intelligent people. And the setting, that confined, sterile environment, it just adds to the tension.
It's like a pressure cooker about to explode. And the dialogue is just sharp as a tack. Every word is loaded with meaning.
It's a verbal sparring match that's just as thrilling as any physical confrontation.
Okay, let's revisit a film that left us all with our jaws on the floor. The Sixth Sense. That twist ending. Mind-blowing.
It's one of the most iconic twist endings in movie history.
I remember seeing it in the theater and just being completely stunned. I had to watch it again just to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
It's a testament to M. Night Shyamalan's skill as a storyteller. He knows how to plant those seeds of doubt and then pull the rug out from under you.
And Haley Joel Osment. What a performance. He's so believable as that little boy who sees dead people.
He's amazing. And Bruce Willis gives one of his most nuanced and understated performances as the psychologist trying to help him.
It's a film that works on so many different levels. It's a ghost story, it's a psychological thriller, and it's a moving drama about grief and loss.
And it all comes together in that final scene where everything clicks into place. It's so satisfying, but also so unsettling.
It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't see.
Okay, one more time. Let's step into the shower with Norman Bates. Psycho. That scene changed everything. It's still just as shocking and effective today as it was back in 1960.
Alfred Hitchcock was a true visionary. He knew how to get under your skin and stay there.
He understood that what you don't see can be just as terrifying, if not more so, than what you do see.
It's like he's saying, I'm going to let your imagination do the work for me.
And that's what makes it so scary. We fill in the blanks with our own fears and anxieties.
And those quick cuts, the close-ups, the music, it's like he's assaulting our senses, bombarding us with these fragmented images of violence.
It's a technique that's been imitated countless times, but no one has ever done it quite as well as Hitchcock.
In the sound design, those screeching violins, they're like nails on a chalkboard. It's a perfect example of how sound can be used to amplify terror.
It's a visceral experience. It's like you can feel the knife plunging into Marion Crane's flesh, even though we never actually see it.
Okay, let's take a quick detour into the world of supernatural horror. The Exorcist. That levitation scene, it's one of the most disturbing and controversial scenes in movie history.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
I remember watching it for the first time and being absolutely terrified. It's so graphic, so unsettling, but the special effects are incredible.
And Linda Blair's performance as Regan is just unbelievable. She's so convincing as this possessed child.
It's like she's not even acting. It's like she's really possessed.
And the filmmaker's decision to shoot the scene in a documentary style, with handheld cameras and grainy footage, just adds to the realism.
It's like we're watching a real exorcism unfold before our eyes.
It's a scene that's both fascinating and repulsive. You can't look away, even though you kind of want to.
Okay, let's switch gears to a film that's a little more psychological in nature. The Shining. That scene where Jack Torrance finally snaps and goes after his family. It's just so chilling.
It's a slow burn, but it's incredibly effective. Stanley Kubrick is a master of building tension and suspense.
And Jack Nicholson is just iconic in that role.
Yeah.
You can see the madness slowly creeping into his eyes.
It's a performance that's both terrifying and strangely sympathetic. You can sense the struggle within him, the battle between his good and evil sides.
And Shelley Duvall is fantastic as Wendy Torrance. She conveys such fear and vulnerability, but she's also strong and resourceful.
It's a classic battle between good and evil. And that isolated, snowbound hotel just adds to the sense of claustrophobia and dread.
It's like they're trapped in a nightmare that they can't escape. And those long, empty hallways, they're just creepy.
It's a film that's full of iconic moments. The twins in the hallway, the blood gushing from the elevator.
It's a film that stays with you long after you've seen it.
Okay, let's go back to the ocean for a moment. Jaws. That first attack scene. It's a masterpiece of suspense and terror.
It's amazing how Spielberg created such a sense of dread and terror with so little screen time for the shark.
It's all about what we don't see. The ripples in the water, the music swelling. He lets our imaginations fill in the blanks.
And those underwater shots.
Yeah.
They're so claustrophobic and disorienting.
It's like we're drowning right along with Chrissy Watkins.
And that final shot where we see the shark's jaws clamp down on her leg, it's brutal.
It's a reminder that we're not always at the top of the food chain, even in a place as familiar as the ocean.
Okay, let's end this part of our deep dive with a visit to one of the most iconic villains in movie history, Hannibal Lecter. The Silence of the Lambs. That first meeting between Clarice and Hannibal, it's just electrifying.
It's a scene that's been analyzed and imitated countless times, and for good reason. It's so well crafted, so suspenseful.
Anthony Hopkins is just mesmerizing in that role. He's so charismatic, so intelligent, so utterly evil.
He's the perfect villain, charming and terrifying in equal measure.
And Jodie Foster is fantastic as Clarice Starling. She's so strong, so determined, but you can also sense her fear. She's walking into the lion's den, and she knows it.
It's a battle of wits between two brilliant minds. And the setting, that stark, sterile prison cell, it just adds to the tension.
It's like a pressure cooker about to explode. And the dialogue. Every word is so carefully chosen, so loaded with meaning.
It's a scene that's both terrifying and thrilling. You're on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen next.
Okay, let's take a quick detour into the supernatural. The Sixth Sense. That twist ending, it's legendary.
It's one of those endings that you never forget, and it makes you want to rewatch the whole movie to see if you can spot any clues you missed.
It's a testament to M. Night Shyamalan's skill as a storyteller. He's a master of suspense and surprise.
And the performances are so good. Haley Joel Osment is just amazing as that little boy who sees dead people.
And Bruce Willis gives one of his most nuanced and restrained performances as the psychologist trying to help him.
It's a film that's both scary and moving. It's about grief, about loss, about the things we can't see or understand.
And it all culminates in that final scene where the truth is revealed. It's a scene that's both satisfying and unsettling.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about the film.
Okay, let's end this part of our deep dive with a return to the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. Psycho.
That shower scene.
Yeah.
It's a masterpiece of horror filmmaking. It changed the way we think about horror movies.
It was so groundbreaking, so shocking for its time, and it's still just as effective today.
It's amazing how Hitchcock creates such a sense of terror with so little actual violence on screen.
It's all about suggestion, about implication. He lets our imaginations do the work for him.
And he uses all the tools of filmmaking to achieve that effect. The camera angles, the editing, the sound design, it all works together to create this unforgettable experience.
And the music. Those
Yeah.
screeching violins are just iconic.
Mm.
They're a part of our collective cultural memory now. It's a scene that's been studied, analyzed, and imitated countless times. But no one has ever done it quite as well as Hitchcock. It's amazing how these death scenes, these brief moments in a film, can have such a lasting impact on us. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors, right? There's the visceral element, the shock value, but there's also something deeper going on.
Yeah, like we're not just watching these scenes, we're experiencing them on some level. It's like those primal fears we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Those fears are hardwired into us. We can't just turn them off because we know it's a movie.
And those fears are often amplified by the way these scenes are crafted. The music, the sound design,
Yeah.
those play a huge role in creating that sense of dread.
Oh, absolutely. Think about Psycho again. Would that shower scene be as effective without those screeching violins?
No way.
Yeah.
It's like Hitchcock is using sound to tap directly into our nervous system.
Exactly. And it's interesting how he used those everyday objects like the melon and the chocolate syrup to create those iconic sound effects.
Right. It's like sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective.
I think that applies to the stories themselves, too. The best horror films weave those special effects seamlessly into the narrative. It's not just about shock value.
Right. It's about creating a believable world, a world that draws you in and makes you feel like you're a part of it. And those death scenes, they become a part of that world, a part of that story.
Okay, we've talked about practical effects, we've talked about psychological horror, but we can't wrap up this deep dive without talking about CGI. It's changed the game for horror movies, hasn't it?
For sure. And I think the chestburster scene in Alien is the perfect example of how CGI can be used to create something truly terrifying and unforgettable.
It's a game changer. And what's so brilliant about that scene is that it's not just about the visual spectacle. Ridley Scott builds the tension so masterfully, and he keeps the actors in the dark about what's going to happen.
So those reactions of pure horror,
Hmm.
those are real.
Oh, yeah. Veronica Cartwright actually fainted when the blood splattered on her.
It just adds to the authenticity of the scene, doesn't it? Like we're not just watching a movie, we're witnessing something real, something raw and visceral.
It's a shared experience of horror.
So I guess the takeaway here is that there's no one right way to create a memorable death scene. It's about using all the tools available to you, whether it's practical effects, CGI, sound design, or clever storytelling.
Right. And it's about understanding those primal fears, those things that keep us up at night. The best horror films tap into those fears and use them to create something truly unforgettable.
So the next time you're watching a horror movie, take a moment to appreciate not just the scares, but the artistry behind them, the creativity, the ingenuity, the dedication to freaking you out.
Uh-huh, exactly. And remember, those filmmakers are just like us. They're horror fans who love a good scare.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of iconic death scenes. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure talking horror with you.
Until next time, horror fans. Sleep tight.